Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the BuzzStream podcast. I'm your host, Vince Nero, and today I'm thrilled to be able to join Harry Clarkson-Bennett. He's the SEO Director at the Telegraph in the UK and the creator of the Leadership in SEO Substack. Today, listeners, we're going to be talking about building a brand in the post-AI world. Harry wrote a great piece about this in the Leadership in SEO newsletter. I checked it out. I'll link to it in the show notes, but I decided I wanted to pick Harry's brain about this because I think there's some great stuff in here. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Before we do, I just want to remind everyone to like, subscribe, share this stuff with your colleagues. The more that this stuff gets around, the more I can have great guests on like Harry. So let's get into it. Give me the skinny here, the short version on how to create demand for your brand.
I think it really depends on like what your brand is or who it is, right? But obviously, if you're like a publisher like us, it's quite a different world to if you're an e-commerce brand who sells specific products. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is build a product that really services our audience or solves a problem. And I think to start with, whatever their main problem is, and it might be that they want to feel like a real affiliation with someone as a publisher and be part of something, or it might be that they've identified a product that they need or something that gives them something that they really desire. But ultimately, I think it's about solving a problem. And I think if you're solving a problem, you really need to know who your audience is to understand what their problem will be. So there's always been like, you always do like the user persona stuff. And I always thought that stuff was like interesting, but never that valuable. But I think there's a good way of doing it where I've seen like a couple of things on Miro and a couple of other companies where they've talked about pain points and why the important thing or what you can do is to identify like, yes, who they are, but what their main pain points are. So you can try and solve those. And I think if you have that as a basis, like that's a really good starting point. And then it's all about like, because you can still create a really good product, but if no one finds it, it's kind of pointless. So once you've got that, once you have a good product and you've established who your audience is, I think then it's about figuring out how you can be like front and center. And do you remember, I'm sure you remember like Google did that whole messy middle thing a few years ago and they were like, oh, it's really difficult to figure stuff out in the middle. Don't worry about it. But now I think the middle's pretty wild. So I think now it's really like, how well do you know your audience? How well do you know where they spend time? What platform? Like basically, how can you influence them in the right place? A lot of that is like, yes, like good organic social campaigns, or maybe Reddit now has obviously got huge through search, but has always been pretty prominent for certain areas. But now people like YouTube, TikTok, all the search engine alternatives, now possibly AI, depending on what you do, and LLMs. So I really think then it's like figuring out what platforms you need to be on, testing, and then maybe also just figuring out who already influences them. Like you can build, like Spottor, I think is a really cool tool for this. Rand Fishkin's new one that he's been working on. We've been using that for a while, building out audience segments, like where they spend time and looking at advertising opportunities. And I think that's been quite helpful in just framing how we should work and thinking about like, I think SEO has always been kind of overvalued as a channel, or certainly for the last like 10 years. Like it's always provided good last click attribution ROI, because that's where people have gone once they've kind of figured out what they want to some extent outside of the kind of comparison queries. Like people find stuff anywhere now, right? So I think there's a bit of a recentering most brands have to do, which is like, how do we really figure out our audience? How do we figure out where they spend time? And that's where we need to be. So probably those four things, you're probably on a good path, I think.
Also, you're in a really interesting position in that you're at a major publisher, news publisher, the Telegraph. You're also the SEO guy there. So like you're seeing the best of both worlds, or the worst of both worlds, if you want to put it.
Exactly.
But I guess my question there is like, how different is the mindset for a major, like huge company who's trying to build a brand versus a small company? Like, does one have the advantage over the other these days?
So like big brands still have a huge advantage. Obviously, I think the standard way that small brands could beat big brands is if they're super agile, particularly in the new, like, let's call it vibe coded world of being able to like build stuff and launch it quickly and test stuff, which I think is awesome. It's really interesting. That's where small brands can win if they're fast and agile. But big brands are still like we get, off the top of my head, I can tell you, but hundreds of thousands of monthly branded searches. If you compare that to other huge publishers in the UK, like the BBC or the Guardian, they get significantly more than that. So you're still on you still have a major advantage. But people have had alternatives for quite a long time now. And I think it's that kind of creator economy where people really trust individuals so much more than they did. And news as an industry, just direct news searches in Google has been declining for quite a long time. And that's not because people are interested. If anything, people are more interested in the consumption of information than ever. They just have so many alternatives. Do you get all of your news from Google anymore going through that method? Probably not. People have individual accounts, could be TikTok, could be X, whatever it's going to be. People just have alternatives now. But I think the big brand advantage is still huge for us. It's still, if you were launching something brand new, I think your way to market is still difficult. If we're launching something brand new, it's a little bit easier to get it out there and to get your name across. And the same goes for any of those big publishers. So for any big brand who's launching this stuff. But I think if you do it right, there's been a flattening of, if you understand how to grow a small brand quickly, there's definitely been a flattening of the difference in scale or size between those two types of brands.
Yeah, I love that idea of kind of creating something. I mean, you referenced this earlier, but create something that has value for a key user. Then, I mean, not every site's goal has to be to reach 100,000 people a year. It's
Right.
if you know your audience and you can convert them or speak to them, however, I mean, that should ultimately be the goal. So I really like that. Other thing I was going to say, I guess, is, so remind me now, I'm not super familiar with the UK news kind of landscape. Where are you kind of in the pecking order with Guardian and Telegraph or Daily Mail?
So BBC is definitely number one. Then I suspect it's probably the Guardian, but it could also be the Daily Mail. The Daily Mail and the Guardian, all those brands are pretty big in America. Daily Mail's huge in America, but it really depends. Over the last few years, there's been a fairly significant shift in terms of what brands rank for specific categories. So that's probably a point before I was in news and publishing where if you were a big brand, you're pretty much ranking for anything. Doesn't matter if it's political, sport. Everyone obviously has elements that they're stronger on. But I think if you spoke to people across different publishers like The Sun, the Daily Mail, us, Guardian, what people are able to rank for has definitely shifted over the last few years. And I know the Google League, Google kind of scoring systems, and they have these maybe baseline foundation metrics. Let's say 0 to 1. If you're not above a certain threshold, then you won't appear in top stories, for example, for something political work. There's definitely been a shift in the way sites have been able to rank for certain things. I couldn't speak exactly to what it was because unfortunately I wasn't here in those kind of halcyon days, but there's definitely been a shift. But I think politically, we've always been pretty strong and big major events, but generally, if you're talking celebrity stuff, it would be the Daily Mail. If you're talking just huge widespread news consumption, BBC has the license fee payer channel or brand is definitely the strongest, and the Guardian, I would say, are probably the biggest ones.
So, and I don't know how freely you could speak to some of this stuff, but I'm curious, your mindset of how you provide value that is different, how are you driving through SEO, how are you driving things that are providing value to your customers that's going to be different in the Telegraph versus these other competitors?
It's such a good question, right? Because what I've always thought, or how I've always tried to create value with content specifically, let's say, I think there's two strands to this. We focus on the content side and the technical side. The content side of things for me is all about, okay, once you have, let's say everybody can structure an article pretty effectively, which is not entirely true, but as long as you understand how to structure an article effectively, make sure that it's easy for people to consume, it's easy for bots to consume, you're on a good path already. On top of that, I think you consider stuff like information gain and the uniqueness of content, how can we add value? And adding value is understanding our audience. So everybody has access to the same keywords, the same tools, the same FAQs, whatever that might be. But I think the way you're able to differentiate yourself slightly is really to understand your audience, to figure out which ones of those queries are going to be the most applicable to them. And for big publishers, obviously, you have pretty different audiences for certain areas. Our product review stuff is none of it's behind a paywall. So immediately that's a bigger, broader audience. So we have to have a slightly different approach there as to other areas. So if you can structure your article effectively, if you understand your audience well enough to know what queries you should be answering, and at a really basic level, for us, you're kind of seen as a premium publisher for slightly more affluent audience, which means that you might be able to tailor your content slightly based on that. We're also a publisher who is right of center, which means you might be able to tailor your queries or questions to that type of audience. So really then it's about knowing your audience. Then it's about the information gain side of things. And how can you add unique value? And I think a lot of that comes down to like being quite canny. Like we have an audience team internally, we have a community team where we have hundreds of thousands of subscribers. We have access to such a huge amount of data that we've done some really good stuff. And some of that is like, did an article on the best internet providers. And you can just do a survey of our audience to figure out, okay, who do they use? How satisfied are they? How can we bring this to like, not many other people have access, not many other publishers have access to that level of information. So it's really about making use of what you have. So we try and do quite a lot of stuff like that where possible. And then we try and leverage things like comments, internal site searches, like to figure out what our audience is saying and to try and bring that to the fore to just have something a bit different. Because particularly with everything that's happened over the last couple of years, it's not that difficult to spin out sort of passable informational content. So for us, it's about being like, right, how do we take it to a level where people won't pay for it directly, but they might register, but it might drive a significant enough amount of traffic. And I think that's where we have to be good and where we're probably judged more harshly, and rightly so. And then there's the kind of technical side of things where it's like, how do we make our site faster? How do we make it more efficient? How do we make ourselves stand out as just like a premium experience with all the kind of EAT metrics and authorship and everything that comes with that, by being like, how do we shout about who we are and what we're good at?
Yeah. Great answer. I mean, I think there's a lot of kind of nuggets in there for anybody in any realm there, but I like the idea of kind of separating the two. It's obvious, but it's like kind of not obvious sometimes, the technical side and like the content side. You did mention, I think, leaning on proprietary data and like taking those wins where you can. I mean, I think that's something that I speak about a lot. And like, even for small businesses, you're a used car dealership or something. It's like, you have probably years of data on like when cars were bought, what kinds of, like there's stuff in there, there's stories that you can tell. I guess tell me if I'm wrong here, but like probably the benefit of having a big brand like you do is you don't need to promote that kind of stuff as much, right? Like you're getting links yourself and
sure.
kind of passively. Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about that.
So absolutely. And like, interestingly, a used car dealership is quite a cool comparison I do, because it sort of plays into earlier what you discussed about like, you have to build this giant audience. And a used car dealership is like, you probably have quite a specific local audience who have quite specific local needs. So you don't need millions of data points to be able to craft something that's a kind of interesting story for people who live in like a tiny place in the middle of nowhere arbitrarily. So like, again, like knowing your brand and knowing your audience doesn't have to be fancy in terms of audience data or collecting things or trying to create something a bit different. It's like standing out is the end goal for everybody here, which I think for publishers means that everybody gets more opinionated. Like, I think what we'll probably see, if we're not already, is that everybody goes a little bit further away from the center because you kind of have to have a voice to survive. And then you lean further and further into your like maybe harder audience because that's maybe where the money is. So I think that's quite an interesting thing that's been happening or will happen. And in terms of the promotional side of things, sticking stuff high up on our homepage when you're a big publisher absolutely has a big impact in search and discover. And I would say that it's like the prominence of your link on a big homepage, that's crawled every few seconds. Obviously, if you put a story up there, it's going to be your biggest story. And that's because if we just talk in search terms, Chrome gets a ton more information about clicks and user engagement behavior really quickly. And I think the way Discover works, a specific theory is that obviously Discover's huge for publishers now, but the big part of the way it works is like taking let's say like a statistical performance, like a Bayesian model of performance where you're able to sit there and be like, there's an expectation of each article, maybe based on the subfolder it's in or the brand it works for, the brand it sits under. It's not that difficult for Google to be able to predict what this article should do. So if you can force that article to overperform in the first 10, 20, 30 minutes, i.e. high up on the homepage, you push on your social channels, you stick it in a newsletter, I think that's a really good indicator almost to Google and an algorithm that it has the chance to go viral. So then it's more likely to be put into a viral platform like Discover. That's obviously like that's a bit of a theory, but I do think that's pretty much how Discover works, is as more of a social type algorithm, and it's much more clickbaity. But definitely for us, people want to work with or link to the Telegraph, or most people. Similarly with the Guardian and the BBC, and although it's much easier for us, it's obviously much easier for them as well. So it's so much easier, but it's also you're competing against much bigger fish.
Right. Well, probably a good segue into some of this stuff, because in your article, you kind of run down some of these kind of metrics or tactics in the AI world now and like how they relate to ranking and whatnot. So let's start at the kind of top here. If you're concerned about showing up in AI, tell me a little bit about the value of a backlink.
So I think the first port of call, I suppose, is like figuring out whether it's valuable for you to show up in AI. And like right now for us, there is basically no value. And I think that's probably the same for most publishers. Not everybody, but for most, particularly publishers who rely on subscriptions and or advertising, which is basically everybody, is that these platforms don't send traffic. They're not designed to send traffic, which makes it a bit challenging to gain particularly advertising revenue. And if it's subscription revenue, then what people would say is like, oh, but it's important to be visible as part of the corpus or whatever of information. Maybe, but nobody cares about that. And you can't really track that very well, despite what people who have AI prompt trackers will tell you. I don't know. I've tried using it. I don't think it's that helpful, but I'm aware that's definitely, I'm only speaking for publishers here. So that's kind of different. If you're an e-commerce brand, I do think it's different for sure. But in terms of the value of a link, yeah, I think the link has sort of followed like, there's a point where it probably still is the most important trust signal in all honesty in terms of getting people to talk about and cite your brand. And I think just generally the mention of your brand with the right with the right keywords either side of it is pretty helpful. So I think the value of a link has certainly declined over time. But I do think it's having something of a renaissance in terms of like digital PR and big scale campaigns will be huge. And like you can see already with how AI or how LLMs give answers is that they really do use they're quite spammable in that you can really, if you just get featured in like any top 10 lists for the best agencies or whatever it might be, you're pretty likely to get featured in there. And Reynolds of SEO Interactive does some really cool stuff. They did a really cool thing about like it was a test of, they put basically just some words in the footer. They ran two things. So they were like, okay, our agency does a lot of work in the finance and banking industry. So they did like case studies, interviews, spoke at specific events, talked about all of this stuff, but then also just put like 8 words in their footer about what they did. And nothing else was mentioned in LLMs, but the footer stuff was picked up in like 12 hours. And he was like, yeah, I mean, so I think we're not ready for like good quality SEO for this stuff yet. It's kind of old school in terms of how these things work, which makes sense. But I think the value is less about the link. Obviously, you want the link for search purposes to drive referral traffic, to be contextually relevant. You still need that. But I think the value is more about being cited, being talked about, being mentioned in the right publications. Like, I think that's still the most valuable thing, which I think it has been for a while.
Yeah, for sure. The whole thing about, and you mentioned this in your article too, like brand mentions are the Ahrefs study about unlinked brand mentions and how it's very basic SEO stuff. And you also did mention this concept that I think is interesting to me, where it's, this stuff is scammable right now, spammable, whatever you want to say. Like there's easy ways to manipulate it. And some of them are basic kind, going back 10, 20 years, even for some of the stuff.
No.
And I want to get into some of these like gray and black hat tactics just because I think they're really interesting. But I think the bigger question to me is like, don't you think these technologies are going to catch on to this kind of stuff, or like how fruitful are these kind of spammy tactics at this point? I mean, it's short-term games. That was, and the reason I bring this up is because you brought up Will Reynolds, and I saw him speak at, I think it was SEO week, and he's kind of pushing for this better ideal that we should all be striving for, where it's like, people, you guys are taking this elevator and I'm taking the stairs, building a better foundation, like that kind of stuff, where these other people taking shortcuts. Like how soon until these technologies pull the rug out from under it? Is that going to happen? What's your thought?
But I actually think maybe you follow Dan Petrovich on LinkedIn.
A bit.
He's really funny. And the stuff he does is super cool. But he basically just wrote an article about, and it was just about the latest version of the latest GPT-5, which was basically that it has stopped training on prior data. So up to September 2024, whenever it was, that was the cutoff. And after that, it's like, look, we basically consumed everything now. This is really expensive. And shock horror, brands are pretty pissed off that you've been stealing content and using it to train your models and then basically exploiting companies for it. So I wonder, maybe twofold. So the reason I bring that up is what they will probably do is just use Google search index. They're already using Bings. I think the role of SEO is still just make sure you're ranking pretty high up, because I am sure that using that index is a far more sensible way of doing things. And Google is actually, recently Google really sucks with spam, but it's still way better with spam than LLMs. And probably the reason why Google's pretty tricky with spam at the minute is people just got so good at abusing it. So I do appreciate that it's difficult, but I do think they've kind of given up a bit and they're investing so much more into AI that like the spam updates are just a bit more like whatever. So I imagine they'll get more of a handle on it in the future. And I think absolutely it will be a bit of a spammy problem for a while. But I wonder if the way around it is actually there's like just a better integration with search engines that just have a much better way of handling spam. And that kind of filters out a lot of the nonsense that might happen. So maybe just featuring in better quality pages is going to be the way forward. So yeah, I think you're right. Like the elevator and stairs option, maybe the elevator at the top has like quite a hot ceiling. Once you reach that site, you really want to get out before it hits that point. Because I'm sure that will happen. And like most of us, I don't have the option of, you talked about, I talked about it, but you also talked about it on like black and grey hat techniques. And that's definitely the one regret I have of my SEO career so far, is that I've not really got into that. And obviously as like a brand, you work for big brands, that's not an option. If you work for an agency, you don't have these options. Like you can't really fuck around. You remember the fuck around find out graph that guy does, where it's just like, there's a point on the graph where it's like, you probably don't want to get here because at some point you'll find out.
Well, we're seeing a lot of that too. Lately,
for sure.
Press Gazette, I feel like is uncovering a lot of these agencies that are doing that spammy, like creating fake journalists to get citations and fake stories and all that good stuff. Sorry to interrupt, but
no, but it's super interesting, and you can see how badly it's been abused over the years. And working in the industries where, and this is most prominent at the industry where there's the most money to make, and that's like iGaming, gambling, casino, that type of stuff, where frankly, they're like, who knew people like to bet, right? Turns out they really like to bet, and people really like gambling. Those industries are where they're like the people who are just unbelievably good at this stuff are. So, and I notice it, if you search for like, at any point over the last few months when I've searched for like best casino, something like some variations on that, you will inevitably find it'll be like HongKongEmbassy.org ranking like position 7 with a one-page site. Somebody's bought and just spun like the best casino websites for X on. And there's people are just constantly building. It's like private blog networks, backmax domains. They just have like this, they just build with them. If you have one thing, like you can't be reliant on a single site for this. But some of these sites make like $10,000 a day from what I understand from just ranking for like a few specific terms. So actually, if you can just build something, buy an authoritative domain, spin it and turn it pretty quickly, even if you only get a few months out of it, it'd be so profitable that it's just kind of worth it. So it's a really interesting industry, not one that I know much about, but when I am pretty shady. There's this guy on LinkedIn called Timothy Malmus something. He did a really interesting look into, I probably won't name the company because I think there's a lawsuit at the minute. But he did a really interesting look into an iGaming and casino affiliate company, and like the dirty nexus of stuff that goes on is wild. like wild. So yeah, it's interesting. That's definitely an area I'd like to got more into.
Same for sure. It reminds me of like just the power brokers or like the people who are, I just recently read, Sam Bankman-Fried, I'm sure you know that name, right? The FTX guy. I read this, it was Michael Lewis's book about him and his life and how he kind of built up FTX. But before he did it, he worked at blanking on like the trader company that did this. But like basically all these big like financial traders, they are just so smart at math and kind of gaming, like finding the edge wherever they can and scaling it to the nth degree. And I imagine that there's that same mindset in the SEO space for a lot of these.
Yeah.
To your point, like if there's money to be had, there's going to be people who are figuring out the odds in the same way that any industry, right? But I think that's, to me, obviously, it's like there's always going to be that kind of these whales of industries that Google is going to have to try to fight against, because they are constantly pushing the envelope on the spam and
yeah.
But on the other end, it's like, it's probably still just a drop in the bucket compared to all the traffic they get. So how much do they really care about?
Well, that's like right now, they don't care about this stuff. They have bigger fish to fry. It's like, it's AI or bust. So it's like, I understand why I disagree with it because they've just done such a bad job of dealing with it recently, but I do appreciate it. Probably pretty difficult to be able to manage. And people are really fucking good at dealing with this stuff. So like I said, they'll have hundreds of sites, but you can afford to lose 20, 30, 40% of them. You know it's going to happen, that you can spin this stuff, you keep doing it, and like there will be the people who have such valuable assets, which is super, super interesting in that world. So but I do really like, but I agree, it's like there's an algorithm. If you're a smart mathematician, you're good statistically, people figure out how to reverse engineer this stuff. You have a bit of a playbook, you just go for it. And then you just iterate on it slightly every year. There were some interesting people I follow who, a guy called Charles Float, who I've only found out about recently. He's been in the industry for a long time from what I know. I don't know much about him, but super interesting on all this stuff.
Yeah, you get some good names here. I'm going to have to check it out. I'll definitely put them in the show notes.
Dope.
So Harry, I want to kind of shift a little bit here because we could probably talk about that stuff forever. But again, I mentioned this earlier. I think you're like in an interesting position of being kind of the inside of a publisher. And these are the types of areas that, digital PRs, our customers would love to get links from all the time. So I'd love to hear kind of your side of things I'm going to start here on just kind of the role that you think these big publishers play in digital PR today. I mean, let's start with like in showing up in AI. Does it matter more, do you think, getting links from these big publishers?
Does it matter more? I don't know. I couldn't tell you for sure. I suspect if on the balance of things, probably purely because it's like another area that it still has value in search. It does have some value in AI to some, to what extent is difficult to tell. But like I said, brand mentions becoming a bigger, more trusted entity is really important. And I wrote a newsletter about Google has a pact about how it scores evergreen articles.
I was just reading that. Yeah, that's a great one too.
It's super interesting, and lots of this stuff, it's not like mind-blowing. It's probably what people generally expect, but the important thing for most things is like link acquisition over time, and there being like a steady link velocity from high-quality sites over time. So those like one-off big spikes are not that important. So obviously it's great if you get people to see who you are and understand your brand, but actually if you're just having singular spikes, you really need to figure out a way to be able to have those kind of hero pieces of PR work or digital PR work that do give you those big spikes and give you more exposure to people. But you really need to figure out a way to create content that people just naturally link to over time. And I think for PRs and big publishers, there's probably not a huge shift in like how to go about doing things. I think the most interesting things that since I've come here have been initially like people's reluctance to actually link to stuff, which has always, it's kind of like, with links being the kind of the backbone of the internet, so to speak, the open web, I always found it quite strange that people were really reluctant to link. And I think
and sorry, Harry, when you're saying people, do you mean like the journalists writing at the Telegraph are reluctant?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And I think it's not just us, right? I think that's been the case for a lot of publishers. Press Gazette did a study on it last year and we did not score well, but there were 3 or 4 worse than us. And one of the ones that were worse than us was messaging me to ask for a link saying it was unreasonable for us to not link. I was like, but you can't do that after I've seen that you're worse than us. Like, we're bad, but Jesus. So, but I don't, it's not from, I think there's just been like some pretty bad SEO advice that's gone out in the industry over the years. And it's like perpetuated where people think, it's kind of like people think you lose page rank if you link out to another website. It was a bit like, right. And it wouldn't have been expressed like that, but it was like, they think it makes our page less valuable. Guys, if we're referencing someone's work or something that they've done, just link to them. It's like manners, right? I'm like, they've done the hard work. Just link to what they're doing. This isn't a big, so that's been an interesting shift. And I do think the link is less important than it was. And I do think like the general mention and being cited in the right place is still important. Publishers still have like big publishing targets. They still need stories. I think if you're in PR and you're working in PR, fundamentals of what that looks like hasn't changed in terms of making it easy for publishers to link to certain things. But I mean, AI is certainly like the world's biggest buzzword, and it certainly makes your job, if you use it well, easier. And I'm pretty sure for PR, there must be some amazing things that you could do with AI generally to make your life a little bit fresher.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're like, our new like list IQ thing is based all off of AI, like AI power to be able to like reach out to people and build these like super targeted lists rather than like relying on a database and that sort of thing. But
Yeah.
So, I mean, would you say from your perspective, has it gotten harder for people to PR people to get through to journalists? Are you seeing that? Are you like, again, like it's very interesting to me on like your perspective being in-house and like, do you feel any of this stuff that the PR side is feeling, which is like shrinking reply rates, shrinking journalists, more competition from other PRs?
So no, not really. Only because basically the only people that message me about this stuff are other publishers. So it's basically other publishers being like, why didn't you link to our thing? We all do like hundreds of stories a day. Everybody, I don't know how we do track passenger publishing volumes. And there's a couple of sites in India who everybody's been like, how the fuck are these guys doing? How are they doing well in the UK? And we found out they were just like, oh, we just spin the stories up with AI. And they were doing like 25,000 stories a month or something like that. And the rest of us doing like, 100, 200, 300 a day, however many it is in the UK, something like that. But I don't really feel it. And I think we've definitely made strides in being like, please link to people. But I'm surprised if that's, maybe a little bit surprised that that's what people are feeling.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it basically hasn't come across my desk.
Yeah. And I guess why would it, to your point? Like but that is an interesting kind of spot that we're in. I think the feeling is like journalists are getting laid off. Has Telegraph been feeling any redundancies?
No, but we are going through a sale process at the minute. So
right. Who knows?
We shall see. But hopefully not. But we are, in fairness, a big subscription pay company in a pretty healthy position. So I'm led to believe. So
right.
Who knows? But in fairness, that's a very good point. And maybe it's in terms of PR and reducing, like, I know it's just happened to Reach. There's a couple of other publications that have lost out quite significantly. Maybe it's just fallen down the pecking order a little bit in terms of what people care about or are interested in. But I would have thought with like news and the need for stories and the constant need and desire to do more, I'm surprised that like, I don't know, maybe pitching just needs to get even better.
Well, I mean, I think that's the thing. There's a little bit of that, like people reaching out to the wrong people all the time. You're casting a wider net than you should be. There's like kind of false ideas on how many links you need to get. And like it's the focus is still on volume and not, quantity versus quality. But the other thing, I guess, is like, I mean, so the journalist layoff thing is adding, the influx of people getting into digital PR. Like, I think there's a lot of kind of like link builder mindset of people kind of coming over and being like, oh, I can do this, and they use the same kind of tactics that they for blogger outreach or for whatever. I mean, the same kind of stuff you're getting probably. You can't really do that with a journalist.
No. Yeah. I think this has definitely not changed. If anything, this is probably more important than ever, but it is always about the story, selling the story well and making it easy for somebody to be like, oh, thank Christ. Like, we're not a high volume publisher, but if you're pitching to a high volume publisher who some people might be doing like, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8 articles a day individually, you really need to make their life easy and understand what it is. So like, for us, it might be a bit different, but I do think it's like I've been saying about understanding our audience. Well, like the digital PR's audience in this sense is the journalists or the publication. So like having a really clear idea about how many articles they have to do a day, what those articles are like, what articles do well for them in terms of traffic or subs, because of their audience, like understanding who they are and who the publication is still, I think, the number one thing for PRs to go, that's how I can craft something really sellable. But you're right, it's quality over quantity and the kind of link building bullshit of just numbers, quantity, just like, please link to my space. It's got to be better of all the times to like really figure out how to sell. It's definitely now. And that's not a shot at any, like digital PR's really hard, really cool. Those are my favorite areas to work with. In the place I used to work, we had a digital PR team, which is a bit of fun in like the SEO and publishing industry of like, get a link, ring the gong, go for a bit. Like it was good fun. Enjoyed it.
Yeah. And the last thing I wanted to kind of get your take on before we go is I spoke to someone who was in kind of has been in the media, worked for New York Times for a long time. And I think the other thing they're feeling is one of the reasons it's so hard in the PR world is just because the news is so crazy right now. I mean, at least in the US, I'm sure feeling it everywhere really. And so like, you have these pieces where it's like, oh, here's the best pubs in London. It's like you're putting that up against these major news events. I mean, so I think I get back to a lot of times. I remember speaking to a local journalist who covers it was like a part of a network and a lot of local journalists, local publishers in the US too. And they were saying like, yeah, when stuff gets crazy, like I would love to be able to share like all these cool studies and stuff, but ultimately like what people care about are like, what do you call it? Like car crashes and crime or something. Like the two things that they end up kind of falling back on when like, they'll try to push the envelope a little bit and diversify, but ultimately it's that kind of stuff. I mean, do you feel that as an SEO? I mean, does that make your job harder when the news gets crazy?
Yeah.
Or is it just like the news is the news and you have to kind of work with what you're given, right?
I think both of those things are true, right? So the way I set the team up here is that you have like news SEO is so different to normal SEO, which is like news SEO, evergreen SEO, technical SEO, but they're all wildly different in terms of what they do and like the type of person it needs. So having that split in the team is quite helpful. So when the news gets crazy, the team are like optimizing quickly for individual things, figuring out what stories are going to do well, what are the spin-off stories, how do we make sure that the right articles are featured in the right places, the headlines are good before they go live. Once it's gone live, it's out there, it's a bit late in lots of cases. Google might not crawl that headline again. So it's like, this is where we are with this stuff. So that's almost like the front line of when things get a bit wild. Or it's like on the election night over here. It was just like, all right, so are you going to be working all night? And I was like, am I? You are? I haven't. What do you mean? So like, oh, most of the time they'll do like, work till like 6 a.m. 6 a.m? You'll be joking. I think I made it till like 4. I was like, I've got to go home. I feel sick. So it definitely does change our team and how people are able to work. And obviously stress levels are higher. But I suspect there's just like, it's kind of like an understanding. I still think the same applies, an understanding of the paper, the publisher, the stories of what's happening. But like I said, news means that you might have the best intentions in the world. You might create a really cool story. It might be all out the window within 10 minutes because like some crazy's happened, like what's happened in America the last couple of days. So yeah, we do feel it, but I think as like somewhat internal, you definitely don't feel it as much in terms of getting our stuff pushed through like digital PR might do. But yeah, maybe there's something about being canny about who you can target, how you target them, what the angle is. The angle for us be pretty different if you pitch someone in my team in the SEO team versus like somebody who's in charge of publishing on the desk. And I think having an understanding of how publishers are structured so you can get your stories through. Like I'm sure most of this is still run on relationships one way or another. But then if you have an understanding of who the decision makers are, definitely easier to get a story pushed through.
Yeah. Well, maybe the last question here is just to remind people, you might be opening yourself up. You can give us as little or as much information here, but how is a site like Telegraph run? How does that work?
So I couldn't tell you other publishers, but I can give you a broad overview roughly of like how these things tend to work. Whereas there's obviously a split of desks. So there's like news teams, sport teams, whatever that might be in terms of like the category of content that they work under. But then there's like commissioners, publishers. There'd be one of those two who'd be in charge of the whole desk and who's in charge of all the stories that go out throughout the day. So there'd be someone on each desk who's like the key decision maker to yes or no, and someone will bring them stories. They'll get pitched maybe 10, 20, 30, 40 stories a day, whichever desk they work on. But it's up to them to go, we're doing this, this is what this will look like. I think figuring out like whose role is, who is the commissioner, who's the publisher, who is somebody writing the article, because some of the pitches probably make more sense to go to like a specific journalist who's writing something, whereas others are really going directly to a commissioner or to a publisher. And it is quite convoluted. And I've been here for 3.5 years, just over, in the editorial section for, actually, I couldn't tell you how long. I still don't get exactly how things are structured. There's a lot of editors, managing editors. Like there's a lot of different people who does get quite confusing. But I think if you try and figure that out, I don't get pitched. No one pitches to me. It's a sad, lonely world up here in SEO.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, good, I guess, that people at least get that right. But
yeah, that's true. But like, if you were pitching to, and then thinking about this, if you were pitching to an SEO, what you'd be pitching to them is like, it's kind of like be quite a boring, straight story, I suspect. So unless you can try and make that a bit jazzy and a bit interesting, like explainers are not normally the sort of sexiness of digital PR. I imagine that's a hard sell. So that would, if someone was pitching us quite regularly, you'd have to sit there and be like, it's probably not the right ball game.
Yeah. Well, Harry, man, this is, we could go on for hours, or at least I could pick your brain about this stuff. This has been super helpful. And
good. Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
I'd love to have you on another time, but I'm going to follow up with, in the show notes with all these people that we talked about, some of these great LinkedIn profiles, but your, this new evergreen piece on your newsletter. There's some really cool gems in there. And of course, the piece that we were talking about today, which is just building a brand in SEO in the post AI world. So awesome. Harry, thanks so much for joining us. Listeners, watchers, readers, I can find Harry on LinkedIn. You can subscribe to Leadership on SEO.com, Substack there. Obviously, check out the Telegraph. Last thing is, if people have questions about this stuff, please reach out, comment on the videos, comment on YouTube. Spotify has comments. I'm sure Harry would be more than happy to answer anything. So again, thank you so much, Harry. Thanks for coming on.
Nice to meet you, Vince. Hey, Doc.
All right. Cheers, everyone. Good luck.